My deadbeat brother lived rent-free for 8 years, while I paid. My parents forced me out of my basement to give it to him. But when I left, and they lost the house without my money, they never saw the justice coming. I'm 26 years old, work as a project manager at a tech company, and I need to get this story off my chest because what happened a few months ago basically destroyed whatever relationship I had with my family. I guess I should start from the beginning, or, well, not the beginning, but from when things started getting weird. Although looking back, they were always like that, and I just didn't want to see it. For as long as I can remember, let's say since I was 15 or 16, I was the responsible son. My brother Jake, who's 2 years younger than me, was always the favorite. The golden child, you know, that type of kid who can do whatever and the parents always find an excuse to justify it. I got my first job at 16 at a supermarket. Nothing glamorous, but I was making my own money. Jake at that time was, I don't know, playing video games and hanging out with friends, and my parents said it was normal, that I was too serious for my age. When I turned 18, I moved into my parents' basement, paid rent, like $400 a month, which at the time seemed fair to me, and I helped with household expenses, like groceries and stuff. Jake stayed in his upstairs room, not paying anything, obviously. The thing is, I always had stable jobs. After the supermarket, I worked in customer service, then got a certification in project management, and got into the company where I am now, all while Jake bounced from one business idea to another. First, he wanted to be a DJ, then a photographer. Then he wanted to sell stuff online, like drop shipping, and my parents always lent him money or bought him equipment. I never asked them for a penny after 18, but they financed like 3 different businesses for Jake that failed in less than 6 months each. And every time he did poorly, my parents said things like he was learning, that it was part of the process of finding his passion, blah blah blah. When Jake was like 22, he met Sarah on a dating app. Sarah seemed nice at first, honestly, but then I started noticing she was kind of materialistic, always talking about brands and expensive things. They got married super fast, like 6 months after meeting, and my parents were happy because Jake was finally settling down. I went to the wedding, gave my older brother speech, everything fine, although at that point I already felt something didn't add up. A year later they had Owen, and then like 18 months later Chloe was born. By that point, I'd been living in the basement for like 8 years, paying rent religiously, helping with expenses, basically being the model son. While Jake lived in an apartment that my parents helped pay the deposit for. Then, we get to the point where everything went to hell. Jake had opened an electronics repair shop, his business idea number 6 or 7. I don't know. I lost count. At first it seemed like it was going well, or at least that's what he said, but turns out it wasn't. Like 6 months after opening, the business fell apart. I know exactly what happened. Jake never gives clear explanations, but I think it had to do with him not knowing how to handle money and getting into debt with suppliers. The point is he lost the business and couldn't pay for the apartment where he lived with Sarah and the kids. One Sunday in March, I think it was March, I'm not sure, my parents called me for a family meeting. I thought it was something normal, like a dinner or something, but no. I sat down in the living room and my mom started with her speech about how family supports each other, that we have to be united in difficult times, all very dramatic. My dad was sitting there nodding, and Jake and Sarah were on the other couch with the kids. My mom basically told me that Jake and his family needed a place to stay temporarily, that they'd lost the apartment, and that they were going to move into the basement. I mean, my basement, the place where I'd been living paying rent for almost 8 years. Can you believe it? They didn't even ask me, they told me. I just sat there like, excuse me? And my mom kept talking like nothing, saying I could move to the hobby room on the first floor, that it was smaller but it was only going to be temporary until Jake got back on his feet. The hobby room, literally, was where my mom stored her craft stuff and my dad had his tools. It measured like 6 by 10 feet, didn't have a closet, didn't have a private bathroom, nothing. When I tried to say it didn't seem fair, my dad interrupted me saying Jake had 2 small children and they needed the basement space, that I was just one person and could adapt. So I moved to that little room in April. I didn't have a choice, honestly, because if I refused, I was going to be the family villain. I put in my bed, my desk because I work from home 2 days a week, and my basic stuff. Everything else I had to store in boxes in the garage. Jake and Sarah settled into the basement with the kids, like it was their palace. And here comes the funny part. Well, not funny, haha, but funny ironic. My parents never mentioned that Jake would pay them rent. I kept paying my $400 monthly for living in a room where my clothes didn't even fit, while Jake lived for free in a space 3 times bigger with its own kitchen and private bathroom. The first few weeks were hell. Jake's kids, Owen was like 4 and Chloe 2, cried all the time, ran through the whole house, there were toys everywhere. I worked from home and needed quiet for my calls, but it was impossible. Sarah didn't work. She stayed home with the kids, and my mom treated her like she was a princess, made her food, watched the kids so she could rest. Meanwhile, I had to leave my little room at 6 in the morning to be able to use the bathroom before everyone woke up because there was only one bathroom on the first floor that we shared. Like 7 people counting Jake, Sarah, the kids, my parents, and me. Food started disappearing. I'd buy my stuff and store it in the fridge, with my name written on it, like specific things I liked or needed for my work, meals. And 2 days later, they were gone. When I asked my mom, she told me Jake and Sarah had to feed the kids and not to be selfish, that it was just food that I paid for with my money. But whatever. I started storing things in my room in a small fridge I bought, but I wasn't even safe there because Sarah would sometimes come into my room when I wasn't there, supposedly looking for something my mom had lent her or, I don't know what, excuse. Like a month into this, I tried talking to my parents. I told them the situation wasn't working, that I needed my space, that I couldn't work with so much noise, that I was paying rent for a room that wasn't even livable. My mom started crying, literally crying, saying I was insensitive, that Jake was going through a very difficult time and all I did was complain. My dad told me I should be grateful they let me stay in the house, that many parents charge more, rent, and that, if I didn't like it, I could look for my own place. When I mentioned that Jake wasn't paying anything, my dad said it was different because Jake had a family to support and I only had myself. You know what it feels like to have your own parents tell you your brother is worth more than you because he has kids? I'd been helping them financially for years, never asked them for anything, never caused problems, and they treated me like I was a burden. Jake, who had failed at everything he tried, who lived off our parents' charity, was the perfect son who needed unconditional support. One day in May, I think, I was on an important video call with my boss and a client, and the kids started screaming in the living room right next to my room. I could hear them perfectly on the call. I tried to mute myself when I wasn't talking, but it was obvious there was a lot of background noise. After the call, I went out and asked Sarah if she could keep the kids a little quieter during my 2 work hours. She got offended, told me they were kids, that she couldn't control them being noisy, and that if it bothered me so much I should get an office. Jake came home like an hour later and confronted me. He told me, who did I think I was to talk to his wife like that they were going through a difficult time, and all I did was complain. I told him I'd been a month without being able to work properly, that I had no privacy, that the situation was unsustainable. He laughed, literally laughed in my face, and told me, welcome to the real world, that he had to deal with 2 kids, 24/7, and that I didn't know what real responsibility was. This was said to me by the guy who'd never held a job for more than 6 months and was living for free in our parents' house. My parents arrived at that moment and, obviously, took Jake's side. My dad told me I was being selfish, that Jake and Sarah needed support, not criticism. My mom said, if I was so uncomfortable, I could move somewhere else. And that's when I made the decision. I told them yes, that I was going to move, and my mom went pale because I think she didn't expect me to say it seriously. The next day I started looking for apartments, but everything was super expensive, and the ones in my budget required deposits I didn't have available immediately. So I found a resort that rented rooms for short stays, like a hotel but cheaper if you rented by the week. I booked a room for 2 weeks to give myself time to find something permanent and get out of that house as soon as possible. I packed my things, the most important ones, and told my parents I was leaving in 3 days. My mom immediately started with her melodrama. How could I abandon them? What would the family say? that I was being immature. Jake was there smiling, like satisfied that I was finally leaving. Sarah didn't say anything, but I saw her checking out the basement like she was already planning what she was going to do with the extra space. I moved to the Perbati resort on a Friday. It was weird, honestly, being in a hotel room after living 8 years in the same place, but it was also liberating. I could work in peace. I could sleep without anyone waking me up. I could cook my own food without it disappearing. The 2 weeks I'd paid for turned into almost 2 months because I still couldn't find an apartment I liked and could afford without burning through all my savings. Here comes the most absurd part of this whole story. Like a week after I moved, my mom called saying I needed to keep paying rent for the room because technically it was still my space. I told her I wasn't living there, that in fact I'd left the room completely empty for them to use however they wanted. She told me it didn't matter, that we'd had an agreement and she was counting on that money. When I told her I wasn't going to pay for a space I wasn't using, she started screaming that I was ungrateful, that after everything they'd done for me, this was how I repaid them. Turns out my parents were counting on my rent to help pay their own expenses, and now that Jake and Sarah were living there for free, they needed my money even more. They also wanted me to keep paying for groceries like before. Basically, they wanted me to subsidize Jake and his family's life without even living there. I told them no, that it was ridiculous, and hung up. My dad called me like 2 hours later, super angry, saying I was being selfish and that I had responsibilities to the family. I asked him what responsibilities Jake had, why he didn't pay anything, why I had to keep supporting everyone. He told me Jake was in a different situation, that he had kids to feed. I reminded him that Jake had bought himself a new Apple Watch the week before, that Sarah had just posted on Instagram photos with a new Coach purse, but supposedly they didn't have money for baby formula. My dad was quiet for a moment and then said that what Jake did with his money wasn't my problem, that I had to fulfill my obligations. But that's when I lost my patience. I told him my only obligation was to myself, that I'd been the perfect son for years, paying everything, helping with everything, and I'd never received even a thank you, just demands for more. I told him I wasn't going to pay anything else, that they should figure out how to manage without my money, and hung up. I blocked my parents' numbers because I knew it wasn't going to end well. Jake wrote me like the next day, a long message saying I was a terrible brother. How could I abandon his family when they needed me most? That the kids were asking about me. That Sarah was stressed because now they didn't have enough money for food. All lies, by the way. The kids probably didn't even notice I left, and Sarah kept posting photos at restaurants every weekend. I didn't respond to Jake, but I did block his number after he sent me like 15 more messages. Then my parents organized a family meeting, invited my aunts, uncles, basically, the entire extended family, and sent me a message from my aunt's number saying we all needed to talk together. I didn't want to go. I knew it was going to be an ambush, but my aunt convinced me, saying they just wanted to resolve things in a civilized manner. I went to the house on a Sunday around 2 in the afternoon, and sure enough, it was an ambush. My whole family was there, literally like 15 people in the living room. My mom started crying as soon as she saw me, saying her family was falling apart because of me, that I'd abandoned my brother in his most difficult moment. My dad talked about family responsibility, that older brothers have to take care of younger ones, all this spiel about traditional values that he never applied when Jake needed me, but expected me to apply now. Then my uncles started, one by one, telling me I was being selfish, that family comes first. How could I let my brother and his kids suffer when I had a stable job, and they had nothing? I explained, trying to stay calm, that I wasn't responsible for Jake's bad decisions, that I'd been helping financially for years and it had never been enough, that they'd kicked me out of my own space to give priority to Jake, and they still expected me to pay for everything. My cousin David, who was always kind of an asshole, said it sounded like excuses, that real family doesn't abandon like that. Jake was sitting there on the couch like a victim, Sarah next to him wiping away tears that didn't even exist, and my parents looking at me like I was the worst person in the world. I told them I wasn't going to keep subsidizing Jake's life, that he was a 4-year-old adult who needed to learn to support himself, and that my parents had created this problem by coddling him his whole life. My dad stood up, pointed his finger at me, and told me that if I didn't help, I was no longer welcome in that house, that he didn't want to see me again, until I came to my senses. I got up and left. I could hear my mom crying and Jake saying something about how he always knew I was toxic. I drove back to the resort with my hands shaking, called my work and asked for the rest of the day off, and stayed in the room, staring at the ceiling, trying to process what had just happened. The following days were a bombardment of messages from my family. My mom, my dad, Jake, Sarah, my aunts, uncles, my cousins. Everyone wrote me saying to reconsider, that I was making a mistake, that I was going to regret breaking with the family. The most ridiculous thing was when my mom called my work, literally called the office and talked to the receptionist saying it was a family emergency and she needed to talk to me. My boss transferred the call worried, thinking someone had died or something, and it was my mom crying saying I needed to come home. I told her not to call my work again and hung up, but the damage was done. Now my boss knew I had family drama. Jake started posting things on social media, never mentioning my name directly, but super obvious it was about me. Stuff like family is most important, and some people choose money over blood. That he'd do anything for his brother, but not everyone has the same heart. His friends commented supportive things, and I looked like the villain of a story they didn't even know, the full version of. I confronted him by phone after seeing one of his particularly dramatic posts. I yelled at him. I'm not going to lie. I yelled that he should stop playing victim on the internet, that he'd had every opportunity in the world and wasted them, that I didn't owe him anything. He told me it was my fault his kids didn't have enough food, that Sarah was depressed about the financial situation, that our parents were devastated. I asked him why Sarah had money for new acrylic nails every 2 weeks. If supposedly they didn't have money for food, why he'd just bought a PlayStation 5, why there were photos of them at an amusement park last weekend if they were so poor. He went quiet and then hung up on me. Like 2 days later, Jake showed up at the resort. I don't know how he knew where I was, probably my mom told him or something. He knocked on my door at 9 at night on a Thursday. When I opened, he came in without me inviting him and started talking about how we needed to resolve this as brothers, that he just wanted what was best for his family, that I had to understand his position. I told him to get out of my room, that I had nothing to talk to him about, but he kept standing there talking and talking about responsibility and family. I finally pushed him toward the door, not hard, just to get him out of the room, and he threatened to call the police, saying I'd assaulted him. I told him to call, to tell them he'd entered my private room without permission, and then he did leave, but yelling from the hallway that I was going to regret it, that the family was never going to forgive me. That night, I sent a final message to my parents, without blocking. First, so they'd see it. I told them I'd tried to be the son they needed, that I'd given everything I could for years, but not anymore, that I was distancing myself from the family for my mental health and not to contact me again. I told them Jake was their responsibility, not mine, that they created this problem and they had to solve it. I blocked their numbers immediately after sending it. The extended family didn't stop. I kept receiving messages from aunts, uncles, cousins, even from a grandmother I didn't even know had my number, all telling me I was destroying the family, that I was selfish, that I was going to end up alone and bitter. I blocked them one by one. It was strangely liberating. Each blocked number felt like taking a weight off. Like a month later, Jake tried something that to this day, I can't believe. He contacted my boss directly, found his email on LinkedIn or something, and sent him a message saying I was going through severe personal problems, that my family was worried about my mental health, and basically suggesting I wasn't reliable at work. My boss, who thank God is a reasonable person, called me to ask what was up. I explained the situation briefly, without much detail, just that I had family problems and my brother was trying to cause drama in my professional life. My boss told me not to worry, that he could distinguish between legitimate problems and family drama, and that my work spoke for itself. That was like the straw that broke the camel's back. That Jake would try to ruin my career, the only stable thing I had in my life, was too much. I considered sending him a legal message, like cease and desist, but in the end, I decided it wasn't worth it. Any response from me was giving him what he wanted, which was attention. I finally found an apartment in June. Nothing fancy, but it was mine. A studio in a decent building like 40 minutes from where my parents lived. I moved with the few things I had, bought furniture at IKEA, and started my new life. It was weird at first, being completely alone without the constant drama, without messages demanding things, without having to justify every decision. The first few months were adjustment. I missed having family. I'm not going to lie. I missed the idea of what a family is supposed to be, but I didn't miss the constant headache, the demands, the obvious favoritism. I started therapy, something I should have done years before, and my therapist helped me understand that what I experienced was emotional abuse and financial exploitation disguised as family obligation. Like 6 months passed without knowing anything about them. I had them all blocked everywhere. Then one day, I got a message from an unknown number. It was a distant cousin I barely knew, telling me that Jake and my parents had been evicted from the house. Turns out, without my rent, and without Jake paying anything, my parents couldn't keep up with the mortgage. They lost the house where I'd lived for 8 years paying my part religiously. The cousin told me, because supposedly she thought I should know, that Sarah had left Jake and taken the kids to live with her parents. Jake was living on a friend's couch, and my parents had moved to a small apartment in the cheap part of town. Part of me felt sorry. I'm not going to lie. But another part, the bigger part, felt they were finally facing the consequences of their own decisions. I didn't respond to the cousin's message. I had nothing to say, honestly. I blocked her too because I knew eventually they'd try to use her to contact me, to ask me for help again, and I'd already made my decision. Now, I'm 26. Still in my apartment, they gave me a raise at work 2 months ago. I'm saving for a new car. I hang out with friends I met at meetup groups, people who didn't know me before, who don't have preconceived ideas about who I'm supposed to be. I still go to therapy every 2 weeks. Still working on establishing healthy boundaries and not feeling guilty for prioritizing my well-being. Do I feel bad sometimes? Yes. Do I wonder if I did the right thing? Sure, especially late at night when I can't sleep. Do I regret it? No. Because, for the first time in my adult life, I'm living for me, not to keep afloat people who never valued me. My therapist says that's progress, that it's okay to put on my own oxygen mask first before helping others. Like the safety instructions on airplanes, you know. Last week, I was at the supermarket and saw my dad in the cereal aisle. He looked older, tired. We saw each other for a second. He opened his mouth like to say something, but I just kept walking. I didn't run, I didn't hide, just continued with my shopping like he was a stranger. And that's what they are now, strangers who share my DNA but not my life. I don't know what happened to them after the eviction. If Jake found work, if my parents are okay, if Sarah went back to him. And the weird thing is, I don't care like I used to. It's not that I wish them harm. It's just not my problem anymore. Sounds cold. Maybe it is, but it's the truth. My life now is simple, quiet, mine. I work, watch shows, cook, hang out with friends. I'm considering adopting a cat. They're normal things that normal people do without feeling like they're betraying someone or having to justify themselves. And that, I guess, is enough for now.